Hello everyone, and now we're going to talk about the reason why we did all this planning. So far, all we talked about was planning. Now we will start talking about executing. What do we do as project managers during executing? It might not be what you expect. Our job during executing is not to do any of the work, but to manage the team and manage the work and manage the project and manage the stakeholders. Not doing the work. The team will do the work. So let's look at executing together. Okay, so before we go to executing, let's look at what we did in planning. We did a lot. In planning, we developed a scope baseline, schedule baseline, cost baseline. We developed some management plans, like the quality management plan, procurement management plan, HR or resource plan. We developed a communication plan, stakeholder management plan, quite a few plans. And we had a risk register ready based on the risk planning that we've done with all the risk planning responses, etc. So now we're ready to go for execution. Okay, so let's look back at the famous circle that we have that shows the initiation process group, planning, executing, control, and closure. And notice now we're going to execute. What are the processes of execution? Let's take a look. Direct and manage project work. This is the overall integrated process. What does it include underneath it? Quality assurance is part of executing. Acquiring the project team, developing the project team, managing the project team, managing communication, conducting procurement, and managing stakeholder expectation. Managing stakeholder engagement. What do you notice from looking at the content of the project executing from a management perspective? Notice that most of it deals with people. Most of it is about improving our chances of project success. How do we do that? By doing lots of quality assurance things. So we have quality assurance, we have everything related to the team, managing the team, acquiring the team, developing the team, managing their performance. We have managing the stakeholder engagement. We have communication. So it's all related. There's lots of soft skills and leadership in here. And this is very important for the project manager to build the skills in this area. So let's look first of all at the integrated process, managing project work, and what that means. Managing project work is the integrated process that includes everything the project manager does during executing, which is the quality assurance, managing the team, managing stakeholders, managing the suppliers, managing communication, etc. A new process that PMI added in the 6th edition is managing project knowledge. Now, managing project knowledge is part of executing. What do we mean by managing project knowledge? Managing the data, managing information, and managing knowledge is very important. Part of managing knowledge is managing the lessons learned on the project. Part of it is updating our project plans. Part of it is also updating the organizational process assets with what we've learned on the project. This is very important. The knowledge asset for organizations is becoming more and more important. So how do we do knowledge management as project managers? Let's look at this slide. So we do networking, communities of practice. So we might have communities of practice as related to quality, as related to scope, as related to managing stakeholders, etc. We can have meetings, work shadowing. Work shadowing, you look at how people are doing the work, you shadow them. Discussion forums, knowledge sharing events, workshops, storytelling, creativity and ideas management, knowledge fairs and cafes, training, lots of techniques. All of them are knowledge management tools and techniques. Now, how do we manage information on the project? Managing information includes methods for codifying explicit knowledge, lessons learned register, library services, information gathering, and project management information system. This is where you put all the information related to the project. Let's talk about managing quality. A lot of what's going to happen here is related to quality assurance. Let's take a look at that. If we look at the next slide, we see that managing quality, the main output from it is quality reports, updates to the project plan, test and evaluation documents, project document updates, etc. And you use different quality-related techniques, data gathering techniques, data representation techniques, and quality tools to do this managed quality process. Now we're going to talk about 3 processes related to managing resources, managing the people, managing the team. These processes are to acquire, develop, and manage. What do we mean by acquire resources? Acquire resources means ensuring that the resources necessary are allocated to the actual activity. Here's a mistake that project managers sometimes do. We assume just because our plan shows someone assigned to an activity that they will end up doing the activity. That does not happen. What really happens in reality is that you assign someone on a plan and somebody else has another plan, and their department manager might be assigning them somewhere else. So you have to ensure you get the person assigned to your activity to work on the activity. This is what we mean by acquire project team. Sometimes it might be a contractor. You want to make sure the contractor is actually acquired to get the job done on your activity. This is what we mean by acquire project team. Just because the team member is assigned on a plan does not mean they will actually do the work. So ensure they are acquired and working on your activity. In acquiring project team, a few scenarios happen. One of the scenarios is that we already know who is the team member who will work on the activity. This is called pre-assignment. Pre-assignment happens when there is only one team member who can do the job, or because the client requested this team member, or because for some reason the name of the team member was mentioned in the plan. So in the plan, when we do resource planning, sometimes we put in the role. So we say we need here a programmer, and sometimes you put the name of the programmer. So pre-assignment means that you already know which programmer is going to work. For some reason, has been pre-assigned to the activity. Big part of acquiring project team is negotiation. But why do I need to negotiate? I'm not selling anything. Well, you are, as a project manager, selling a lot, of course. You're selling the idea of your project to the stakeholders. You're selling the idea of your decisions to the stakeholders. You're selling the idea of why you need the team members to do certain things. But negotiation here, we mean when you have to negotiate with functional managers. For example, you want a certain resource assigned, you're looking for a certain level of seniority, and the functional manager refuses to give you that seniority. He says that it's not available. So you negotiate, try to get that functional manager to give you the level of seniority on the project task that you need. Same thing with the project managers. Other project managers might require the same resource that you require. So you need to negotiate to ensure that if you have the priority because you have a more strategic project, you end up with that person on the task. And if not, maybe you get part of their time to work on your task. And you also negotiate with contractors, and you negotiate with the sellers, people who are working on from outside the organization who are working on your project. Sometimes you have to use acquisition. Acquisition means if we don't have a certain resource, we have to get that resource contracted from outside. That's basically what we mean by acquisition. More and more, we are working with virtual teams. Virtual teams are team members who do not exist on the same physical location or in the same physical location. So virtual teams, again, this is a trend. More and more, this is happening because we end up doing more work on the cloud. We need resources. We can apply and contract and acquire resources from around the world using technology, communication technology. So we will probably see more on virtual teams. Now, with virtual teams, you have to be careful about conflict. Sometimes conflict is not as evident as when people are in the same room. So you have to be careful as a project manager. The good thing about virtual teams is that it allows you to get resources who cannot be physically present with you while working on the project. So let's say we need a certain resource, highly expert, highly important for the success of the project, but they cannot join us, they are in another country. If we do a virtual team setup where they can work from where they are, we get the benefit of them working with us without actually the cost of moving the resource over. Without the cost of moving the resource over. When we acquire the team, there are different factors that play a role in the selection of the team member. Which team member do we acquire? This depends on the availability of the member, the cost of the member, the needs of the other projects, the knowledge, the skills, the attitude, and other international factors if we're working internationally with an international team. How you behave with team members will depend on the team member readiness. And this situational leadership model talks about that. We have 4 areas of readiness for team members, depending on how highly or low motivation they have, and depending on how much understanding of the task they have. So we have the understanding of the task, or task orientation, and motivation, both sides. So what does this mean? So team member who does not have much understanding of the task, but very highly motivated, requires me to give direction, which means they don't need me to motivate them much, but they need me to give them clear direction and guidance on what they need to do to get the task done. Usually people with entry-level employees are like that because they are very motivated, they want to get in, they want to do things. Also people who are just joining your team. They're trying to prove themselves, but they don't understand the task. So it's your responsibility to explain the task. After a while, this motivation goes down a little bit. So you need to ensure it stays up. So in that case, we go to the next box. So the first box we described is the navy blue box, the dark box. Now, after a while, we have to go to the light green box. When people start having lower motivation, we need, as leaders, to provide them higher motivation. So what we have to do is to explain, to be transparent, to raise their motivation, to keep them motivated on the project. And usually this happens when you become more participative with the team members, when you have more of a facilitating style. After a while, the team members understand the task, but they still need motivation. So in that case, we still provide motivation, but maybe less direction because they understand the task. After a while, when the team members feel comfortable with the task, understand the mission, they are completely motivated, you go back to the absent style, where you actually just move out of the way, the laissez-faire that we talked about in earlier modules, where you move out of the way and let them do the job. So you change your style depending on the readiness of the team member. So if the team member is joining your team, they probably need lots of direction. After a while, they need you to be participative. So in the beginning, you need to be directing. Then you need to be participative. Participative means you ask for their opinion, you show them that they're important to the team, they get a chance to understand how you make decisions. And finally, when you find that they are motivated enough, they understand the task enough, you can delegate more of the responsibility to the team members. Next, so we have acquired the team, now we need to develop the team. Developing the team means giving them the capacity building that they need, like training them, building their motivation, and getting them ready to get the job done. Developing your team so they can do what they need to do for you on the project. Developing the team requires lots of soft skills. Project management has some hard skills and some soft skills. It is the soft skills that are hard. Soft skills means dealing with people. This is the toughest part of project management. Not developing the critical path or developing a work breakdown structure. This is the easy part. These are called the hard skills, but they are the easy part. The soft skills are the hard part. So if you can learn how to manage people, manage expectations, work with managers, negotiate, lead, that helps you a lot as a project manager. So why do I need to develop my project team? I need to improve their knowledge and skills so they can do a better job for me. I need to improve the feelings of trust among the team and with me. I want to create a dynamic, cohesive, and collaborative team culture so that I get better productivity, team spirit, cooperation, and this way I get more cross-training and mentoring among the team members. Another model we need to talk about is the Tuckman model, which talks about the stages of transforming a team. Now, in many cases, project managers are in a rush. They want to get the work done. So they assume that the team will start by being very productive. This is very wrong. Never happens, because the team, when they start, they will not be very productive. They need to go through stages of transformation. So Tuckman made this model that says in the beginning, we have 4 stages. And sometimes we talk about 5 stages. The 4 stages are forming, norming, storming, performing, and some add to it adjourning, which means letting the people go after they're done with the task. So forming means we get the team together. When we form the team in the beginning, people are not speaking their minds, they're trying to look good for the other team members, they're trying to be accommodating, but no real value negotiation is happening or discussions. Nobody is bringing up objections because they don't want to bring objections. Usually the team in this case are trying to stay with harmony. They want to have harmony. They don't want to rock the boat. But nothing will happen here, not much work will happen because we're not discussing the important issues. Next, team members start having conflict among each other. And when the conflict happens, then this is where the storming happens. There will be conflict, disagreement on how to do things, disagreement, disliking people's styles. I don't like your style, he does not like my style, etc. And then storming happens. Some project managers, they panic when they see this. This is a normal part of the transformation of the team to get you to performance or performing. Project managers who are experienced in this might actually push away from the forming stage into the storming stage quickly. Why? Because they know that without going through the storming stage, we're not going to get much performance. So they want to push through the storming stage to move into the norming stage. In the norming stage, this is where we start getting used to each other. We start synchronizing, working in synergy, being able to understand where we come from and how we complement each other. See, we don't have to be the same to get the work done. What we need is to respect what we bring to the team and what others bring to the team. And we work together so we can take advantage of the strengths that we have collectively and help each other with mitigating the risks that come from the team behavior. And this is where we come into the norming stage, and then performing happens. We become in sync and we work together cohesively in an integrated fashion, good interfaces among team members, moving forward into performance. After that, adjourning. Now, this is very important for project managers. The problem here and the challenge for a project manager is to get to the performing stage quickly. Sometimes you work with certain team members for a few days. Getting them to perform within these few days, getting them motivated is a challenge. And this is why project managers need a very high degree of leadership. They need to be influencers and they need to be motivators. So how do we get a high-performing team? Let's look at the dimensions of a high-performing team. Clear and elevating goals. In many teams that I consult to, sometimes they are not really clear on the goals. So you need to provide clear goals for the team. Results-driven structure. So we're after results. The key results that we are after should be clear. And we should be focusing on the results, on what we want, rather than focusing on the side issues. We need competent team members, of course. We need unified commitment from the team. We need a collaborative climate. We need standards of excellence, external support, and principled leadership. Stephen Covey says, you manage things, but you lead people. You control things, and you release people. Think about a great leader. Sometimes when we try to be leaders as project managers, we don't think about who do we consider a good leader. So it's a good idea to look around us from people we know and people we hear about and people we read about. Who do we consider a good leader? What makes a good leader? You will find that the ability to communicate, influence, negotiate, and work with people is key for good leadership. Project management, a big part of project management is leadership. So what do excellent leaders do? Excellent leaders always ask questions. One of the people I like reading about and reading what he writes says that every day he always asks, what am I doing? Why am I doing it? And is there a simpler or better way to do it. So the good leaders are always challenging the process, asking why are we doing things this way? Is there a better way to do things? Why are we doing these things in the first place? They always inspire a shared vision. They help the team see the desired outcome that we are after. They also enable the team members, so they don't centralize everything in their hands. To the opposite, they try to actually help enable the team members, empower the team members to get the job done. They are encouraging to the heart and they model the way. They always lead. So how can we tie the 4 stages of the transformation of a team with with my style of leadership? So if we look at the forming of the team, during forming of the team, I need to be directing because team needs guidance. Then we go into storming. I need to start participating with the team to help them with the storming that is happening. Also, when we go to norming, same thing, facilitating, motivating, etc. And finally, I can go laissez-faire when the team understands the vision, has the motivation, and understands the activity. So when the team performs, they need actually to improve productivity, and this comes from good relationships. So how can we do that on a project team? Think about the things that a leader can do as an exercise. Think about and list the things that a leader can do to improve relations and improve productivity of the team. One of the things that I like to use a lot is the ground rules, especially if I have a team that has just started working with me or that has new team members. Ground rules, or people from different cultures. Ground rules are really key. What do we mean by ground rules? These are rules by which we govern our behavior and we work together. For example, what language do we use? How do we solve our issues? How do we communicate with each other? What is allowable behavior? What is not allowable behavior? What is a rewarded behavior? What is the team expected to do? What is the individual in the team expected to do? These are called ground rules. It's like the rules of a game. So if you go play basketball, you need to know the rules of the game. Ground rules are like the rules of the game. Ground rules are very important because one of the things that happen when we have ground rules is that we are clearer on what is allowed and what is not allowed. What are the norms? We understand the differences among us. What do we consider important? What do we value? What are our principles? The team has to share with the development of these ground rules. And this way they become more accountable towards them. You should not become the police person who is supposed to enforce these rules. Instead, all the team should be accountable for ensuring that the ground rules are followed. Next, we will talk about co-location, or what we call tight matrix. Co-location is almost the opposite of virtual teams. In co-location, instead of actually dealing with team members in different physical locations, we bring the whole team into one location so that they can work together and collaborate together on the project. This is done usually in important stages of the project or for critical projects, where staying in their departments might be delaying the work for the project. To give you an example, if we want to co-locate a team during a certain phase, let's say during testing, we bring in the team members from their departments, put them in the project, some people call it the war room, project war room, or a project room, where everybody from different departments working on the project are sitting together and collaborating together. Recognition and rewards are very important. Recognition and rewards are key. Different project managers reward and recognize in different ways. Culture plays a big role in recognition and rewards because what's valuable in some cultures might not be valuable in other cultures. Money is a reward that is universally accepted by people. However, I don't like to use money as the first level of reward. I believe that there are things far more important, and you can build a better team by focusing on non-monetary rewards. PMI does not say that, but this is giving you from opinion and experience. So you need to recognize people, recognize what they are doing, appreciate what they are doing. Tell them that you observe when they do something well. And it's not always about money. Sometimes using money as a reward, not only in my opinion, many experts say it might actually spoil the team members. Remember, recognition should be based on behavior. Rewards should be based on behavior and not based on a person that you keep rewarding. So it has to always be based on performance, on something they've done, based on behavior. Next, we will talk about managing the team. Managing the team means ensuring that the performance needed is happening. When it does not, that means we need to interfere. And we do conflict resolution. One of the things we do is conflict resolution. There are different types of conflict resolution. There are 5 techniques that PMI talks about. There are more, but these are the ones that PMI talks about. PMI says when we are dealing with conflict, we can withdraw, smooth, compromise, problem solve, or force. Withdraw means avoiding dealing with the conflict, letting it be. Smooth means try to remind people of the importance of the relationship instead of focusing on the conflict. Compromise means finding a middle ground where nobody gets what they want exactly, but they get a 50-50 proposition. Problem solving is where we sit as mature people sitting down trying to resolve our issues in a fair win-win fashion. And forcing means forcing a resolution on the other person. Each one of these techniques is used in certain situations that might not be fit for other techniques. So you need to be aware of which technique is used when. PMI talks about this a lot, and they ask lots of questions about which conflict resolution should you use in a certain situation. So let's take a look at how the different resolution techniques fare as far as getting you what you want and maintaining the relationship. Now, remember, you have personal goals and you have relationship. Now, forcing will give you your personal goals, but does not do well in maintaining relationships because you're going to force someone. And remember, forcing leaves the other person seeking revenge, or they're trying, they had to do what you are asking them to do, not because they believe it is the right thing. In smoothing, you are taking care of the relationship, but you are not worrying about your personal goals. In compromise, it's both. In problem solving, you are actually taking care of the relationship and taking care of your personal goals both, because you are going after win-win. You want to do what is fair. With withdrawal, you don't care about the personal goals or the relationship. You are withdrawing from the conflict. Another thing we need to mention is that withdrawing and smoothing does not resolve the conflict. They provide a quick fix just to get things or take away from the tough situation to make it a little bit better, while the other ones provide a more permanent solution. Remember that forcing provides a win-lose resolution, which is not good, because you win, the other side loses. The problem solving is the best if you have the time for it. It gives you a win-win resolution. When do we use forcing? When do we use forcing? Forcing is used when important issues are at hand that cannot be compromised. For example, things related to values or principles. Somebody stole, somebody lied, somebody is doing the wrong thing, somebody is breaking the law, doing unethical stuff, etc. Then you have to force if you can. Forcing for it to happen, you need to have the ability and the authority to force. Problem solving is used when you have the time to problem solve, and it requires mature adults who are willing to work towards a win-win, fair resolution. Compromise is used when there is no time to resolve and you really want both sides to stay happy. So you go with compromise. And you don't really care about finding what's right and what's wrong. You just need to move on. Smoothing is done when you want to maintain the relationship and the issue is not about right or wrong. You just want to maintain the relationship. Withdraw is when you have no interest in resolving the issue. That's how you look at things as far as which technique to use. So leadership, what do I need to do from a leadership perspective to get better productivity from my team? Leadership requires openness, affection, knowledge, and connection. We need to be open and transparent in how we deal with the team. We need to build the knowledge so people know about how to work with each other. We need to build affection to show that we care for each other. And we have a connection. We feel like we are one team. Decision making is important for project managers. What are you supposed to do as a decision maker? How do you do decision making? One of the most important things in decision making is to follow a methodology. Another thing in decision making is not to get distracted and focus on your goals. You have to understand the environmental factors, analyze the situation, build on the personal quality of the team members so they can do better decision making to help you with the decision making. You need to simulate team creativity and manage risks. A few more ideas about how to build high-performing teams related to leadership. You need to use situational leadership, like we said. You need to build productive relationships among team members, create a positive work model, focus the energy, and ask effective questions. So managing is important. You need to be a good project manager, but leadership is also key. So we need both management and leadership abilities. So let's talk about developing productive relationships. They did a study on which things affect productivity of the team. They found out that openness can improve productivity by 37%. That means transparency, clear on how you make decisions. They found out that affection, which means we care for each other as persons, brings up productivity by 30%. Notice that knowledge, so people know each other, brings it up by 21%. And connection, we know that we belong to the team, we are connected together, brings it up by 16%. So how do we develop productive relationships? We need to create a positive work model, focus the energy, and ask effective questions. Let's see how that is done. Let's see how we create a positive work model and focus the energy. Usually, when we are trying to improve, the first thing we try to do is to focus on our weaknesses. This is not really the best way to do it. You don't want to focus on the weakness when you're trying to improve. You want to focus on the strength. You want to focus on the positive. But that's not what people usually do. So if we sit down in a meeting, to give you an example, and we start saying, okay, how can we improve? We start saying, well, we're not really good in this, we're not really good in that. That's not what we need to do. We need to do the opposite. We need to do a positive work model by starting from the strengths. What do we do well? This is a good beginning point, and it will give you better results. So what we need to do, to look at the things that we're doing well, acknowledge it, recognize it, celebrate it, and then talk about how can we make the situation ideal. Means how do we improve on what we have, and put a plan on how to do that. Focusing the energy means focusing on what is positive instead of what is negative, and try to go beyond that to something even more positive. Remember, we need to have proactive thinkers in the team who think of change as a chance to improve instead of it being a threat. And you do that instead of it being a threat, and you do that by building positive work models. Next, we will talk about asking effective questions. What do we mean by effective questions? I'll give you a couple of examples. First of all, try to go with questions that cannot be answered with a simple yes or no, that bring up conversation. Another thing with effective questions is to ask what and how instead of why. Why? Because why brings up defensiveness. So if you ask someone, why aren't you done yet? They will start defending. But if you say, what can I do? Or what can we do to get this done faster? Or how can we change the situation so we get a better result? People will be more positive responding to this kind of question. So ask what and how instead of asking why. Next, we will talk about managing communication. Very important process. This is also part of the executing process. Now notice something very important here. Unlike in planning, there is a certain sequence that we follow in developing the plan, starting from the scope, then the schedule, then the cost, then the management plans, then the risk, etc. However, in executing, there is no one order. You're doing all of these things at the same time. So you're actually managing the team, you're actually managing communication, managing stakeholders, managing the procurement at the same time. So there is no sequence. So don't think that we manage the team, then we manage communication. That's not the way it goes. So how do we manage the communication? Managing the communication means we ensure that the communication is happening. Remember, with executing, what we're trying to do is implement what we said we will do in the plan. So we had a communication plan. Managing the communication is ensuring that we are implementing the plan and that we are getting the results that we want. For risk, we need to execute the risk response plan that we developed during planning. So this is the risk executing process. So here what we're doing, we are implementing the risk responses. And we have to see if what we have put in the risk register as a response is being actually implemented. We have to actually implement it. Out of this will come out lessons learned, issues log, and updates to the risk register. We have also the procurement executing process. Procurement executing process means that we are actually soliciting procurement. So procurement planning is about developing the plan on how we're going to do procurement. Executing procurement starts from the moment we put out a request for proposal or a request for quote. So when we solicit proposals, this is where the executing process for procurement starts. We evaluate the offers or the proposals. We select a seller. We negotiate with the seller, contract the seller, and the seller starts the work. All of this is part of executing the procurement. So be careful about where executing starts in procurement. Here we have to talk about contracts. Contracts are very important, but luckily PMI does not go into detail into them. And contracts, so let's see what PMI says about contracts. Contracts are a mutually binding agreement that obligates the seller to provide a specific service and obligates the buyer to pay for it. PMI says seller, supplier, usually seller, and buyer, client. Part of contracts that you need to know, we need to do contract negotiation. In contracts, there are responsibilities on both sides, the seller and the buyer. Contract types are very important, and PMI asks a lot about them. So what are the contract types? Firm fixed price. To give an example on it, when you ask someone, how much do you want to build this house? So they say $250,000. This is a firm fixed price. Now, who carries the risk in this case? The seller. Because if the cost is higher, it's not the responsibility of the buyer, it's the responsibility of the seller. So contracts are a vehicle for transferring risk. So as far as the buyer is concerned, he's transferring or she's transferring the risk to the seller as far as the cost overrun, because they're getting a quote and the responsibility for that quote is that of the seller. Firm fixed price is a type of contract where the buyer will pay more to the seller if certain positive outcomes were delivered by the seller, like finishing earlier, for example. We might say $10,000 extra if you finish early. Time and material is costs only. I'm paying only for costs. So if I'm telling the supplier, I will pay you for the material, who is building me the house, I say, listen, I'll pay you for the material, and I will pay you a certain price per day for each skilled laborer or technician or engineer that you bring to the location. This is called time and material. What if we had a cost plus fixed fee contract? Cost plus fixed fee contract means the seller tells me, listen, I will do the work, you pay for the material, you pay for the labor, and you give me an extra $20,000, for example. This is cost plus fixed fee. Now, in this case, who carries more of the risk? It is the buyer, because they're paying for the cost. So the cost overrun will affect them. And then we have cost plus incentive fee, which means same thing as cost plus contracts, but we're saying to the seller that if you finish earlier, for example, or if you bring in and prove that you're bringing in material at lower costs than the market, then we will give you a reward. So as you can see, the risk is with the seller for fixed price, and the risk is with the buyer for cost plus. Now, which one of these relationships requires the most level of trust? Of course, the cost plus contracts. Also, cost plus contracts require that the supplier or seller has a way to show the his accounting or for the costs that are incurred, because if they don't have the system, they cannot share that, and that would not work. Another thing that happens with cost plus is that you need to align the interests of the seller with that of the buyer, which means as far as the seller is concerned with cost plus, they don't care if the cost goes up. So how do you realign? By giving them incentive of keeping the cost down, by showing them if you keep the cost down, I will share the savings with you. Proposal evaluation systems, we have quantitative ways to evaluate proposals and qualitative ways. Remember, part of executing procurement process is to evaluate the proposals that we receive. There are quantitative ways, there are qualitative ways. Quantitative ways, when you look at the price, when you look at the time as a determining criteria. Qualitative ways, by giving a qualitative score for the product and how much you feel the product suits your needs. So I might say this suits my needs 80%, this suits my need 90%. So that's called qualitative. You need a combination of both to evaluate the proposals. Here's an example of how we can use quantitative and qualitative techniques to evaluate a proposal. Let's take a look at this slide together. Notice that we have some mandatory requirements and we have some optional requirements here. So for example, we have requirements like how much does this, in mandatory requirements, we have two evaluation criteria, interface with existing systems and the footprint. So if you notice, mandatory requirements means they must be met. So any vendor who gets no on any of these items will be disqualified. So notice vendor B will be disqualified because their interface, they do not interface with the existing system. So you must get a yes on mandatory requirements. Now, when we go on optional requirements, notice that we have three criteria: matching colors, lightweight, and low power. And here we have, we're giving a score to these. So, but these are optional requirements, means even if you score low on one of these, you will get a lower score, but you will not be disqualified. So you have to fulfill the mandatory requirements to be considered for the optional requirements. So notice we are evaluating only A and C for the optional requirements. We have, for each one of these criteria or requirements, we have a weight and a raw score. The weight shows you how important is this requirement. So notice that lightweight and low power is more important than matching colors. You multiply the weight by the raw score to get a weighted score. You add all of these together to get a total score for a supplier, and in this case, who is winning? The vendor C. Qualitative, some qualitative considerations might be trust, stability, and the win-win culture. And based on that, you might change your decision. You might say we have more trust with the vendor A and we will go with vendor A, for example. But there has to be some mechanism for that. So let's talk about managing stakeholders. Now, this process, in my opinion, it's not covered enough in the book. This might be one of the most important skills that I look for when I hire a project manager. The ability to manage stakeholders and manage their expectations. We need to build a relationship with the stakeholders. And there are different models that help you with that. I advise you to look at one podcast that I had with Doug Floto about managing stakeholders. You have to build a trusting relationship. You have to have rapport with the stakeholders. Rapport means that they trust you, that you're honest with them, and you are also competent. This brings up what I call a trusting relationship and good rapport. So remember, you have to manage the stakeholders, you have to manage their expectations, which is not an easy task. It's a challenging task to manage stakeholders' expectations. Remember, you have to analyze the stakeholders. Analyzing the stakeholders to know who they are, their background, their interests, their relationships among each other, what information is important to them, what's their risk tolerance. If you remember, we talked about that earlier. You have to always involve and engage the stakeholders always. Build trust, build rapport. Remember, stakeholders are people or organizations that can be affected positively or negatively by the project or the project work or the outcomes from the project, and who influence the project same way. Let's talk about managing expectations. Managing expectations means you have to involve, for example, the stakeholders early, engage them early, engage them in identifying their requirements, identifying their needs. You need to also do a very difficult balance between change control, refusing to let scope creep come in, where people add scope that is not in the original baseline, and also getting buy-in from the stakeholders. Always be proactive when working with stakeholders. Proactive communication, not reactive. You have to build trust with the stakeholders. This comes with open communication, with no surprises. So you have to listen and ask open-ended questions. As we said, open-ended questions are questions that require more than a yes or no. Give timely responses to their questions and requests. The rule is need to hear rather than want to hear. So you have to tell them where the problem is, not what they want to hear, that there is no problem. You have to focus on win-win solutions. You properly evaluate the direction, advice or input from stakeholders. Sometimes they are giving you a direction, sometimes they're giving you advice. Sometimes this is their feedback. Remember that authority is not always explicit. So it's not always the CEO who has the only authority. Other people carry authority even if their authority is not by their position. Managing stakeholder relationships and engagement, managing the stakeholder engagement is key. Best project managers are the ones who can handle this. These are the key processes for executing, and we will see you in the next module where we talk about monitoring and controlling.